Let me say, Joe, I'm sorry I'm not wearing my puffy jacket today.
Oh, I don't know that. Will that play in? I think that'll play in parts of Texas, Austin. I'm sure Austin. Senator,
except it's 95 degrees.
Right. We talk about what government can and can't do, and that's where I want to start this conversation. We'll talk about China a little bit later too, with the news from yesterday. But you introduced some bills where the government would induce drilling, or at least induce hydrocarbon production. And I'm wondering does that make sense? That reminds me of social engineering or corporatism, or the government getting into what the free market should be doing on its own. Does that go against what you would normally do by trying to tell companies how they should be deploying their assets?
Well, let me be very clear. I don't want the government drilling for oil and gas. What I want the federal government to do is get the hell out of the way and let the private sector operate. It's an amazing thing watching the White House's talking points, because they're right now trying to claim these skyrocketing gas prices. They have nothing to do with it. It has nothing to do with any government policies. And that doesn't pass the straight face test. Joe Biden, when he was campaigning, in 2020, he promised the American people, he said, if you elect me, I'm going to shut down drilling. I'm going to shut down drilling on federal land. I'm going to shut down drilling. End it now. That's what he promised. And if you look at his record, he's put in place policy after policy after policy. It has been a relentless assault, all designed to do everything possible to stop domestic energy production, to stop production of oil in the United States, to stop production of natural gas. And it's had its intended effect. We've seen when Biden became president, the average price of gasoline nationwide was $2.38 a gallon. Today, it's actually, the numbers you have, I think, are one day off now. Today, the national average is $4.71 a gallon. That is a massive impact that is hurting working families across the country. And suddenly, the political operatives in the White House realize people don't like spending $100 to fill their minivan. They don't like spending $150 to fill their truck. And so now the White House is trying to blame everyone else. They're trying to blame the greedy oil companies. They're trying to blame Vladimir Putin. Anyone but the people who actually put these policies in place.
Let me just give you a look at this is a Wall Street Journal today, and it's a bigger. This predates the Biden administration, and it turns out that now the way that certain oil executives are paid has nothing to do with production anymore. In fact, it used to, and that's been changed because of pressure, and it comes from all over the place, from ESG and from some of the financial institutions that have been induced. Or because of maybe Larry Fink, he's running a big financial institution, doesn't want hydrocarbon production, so he's pressuring these companies. So it predates the Biden. I would certainly blame it on the left side of the equation, and on climate hysteria is one of the reasons that we've gotten to this point. But it's not Biden. It's everywhere. It's in Europe. You can't look anywhere where there isn't pressure being brought to bear on fossil fuel companies to leave fossil fuels in the ground.
Well, you can look at the United States in 2017, 2018, 2019, and 2020. And listen, I agree with you. Does Wall Street bear some of the responsibility? Absolutely. Does Larry Fink personally? There's a Larry Fink surcharge. Every time you fill up your tank, you can thank Larry for the massive and inappropriate ESG pressure. And by the way, when Trump was president, one of the things I sat in the Oval Office with him and urged him to press back against Wall Street using ESG to try to leverage and force people to stop energy production. America being energy independent is incredibly important for our national security and also for the vibrancy of our economy. But Joe, look, on this show, you guys cover the markets all the time. The White House's talking point on the oil companies is they say suddenly the oil company CEOs are these evil, greedy bastards. Now, I'm not going to suggest to you that oil company CEOs or any other CEOs are wonderful, altruistic Mother Teresas. They all have profit motives. But you know what? They had a profit motive when Trump was president. They wanted to make money too. And the idea that suddenly things change, you know, if you can just look at the facts for a second, and in particular, Biden sworn in $2.09 is the average price of gas. Now look at the decisions that Biden made. He starts on January 20th, the very first day in office. He cancels the Keystone Pipeline. That's on January 20th. Then on January 27th, he halts new oil and gas leases on federal lands. Then on February 19th, he rejoins the Paris Climate Agreement. Then on May 7th, he takes 30% of land off limits for oil and gas. Then on June 1st, he halts drilling in Anwar, the incredibly oil-rich small region of Alaska. Then on June 30th, Congress reverses Trump's natural gas regulations. Then on October 7th, Biden reverses Trump NEPA regulations, which made it easier to drill. Then on October 29th, Interior begins imposing the, quote, social cost of carbon. November 15th, the moratorium on oil drilling in Chaco Canyon. And then right here, February 24th, Russia invades Ukraine. So from here to here, Russia had not invaded Ukraine. That's all Joe Biden. That's government policies. Now, after the invasion of Ukraine, yes, that had an effect driving up prices. But also, after that, March 1st, Biden releases oil from the Strategic Petroleum Reserves. May 12th, Biden cancels remaining lease sales. And March 21st, the SEC proposes the anti-oil rule. It has been a relentless war of policy. And I point out, Joe, this is what Joe Biden promised us. In this instance, not many instances, but in this instance, Joe Biden and Kamala Harris are meeting their campaign promises.
No, I have the tape. Look at me. Look at me. I will end the fossil fuel. I have the tape. I have the tape during the campaign.
Yep.
You know, we had a bleep earlier, and what did you say? They're not a bunch of Mother Teresas. Did you see that, Becky? We were ready to bleep that again. We were ready, but you came out with, I'm going to start using that with a bunch of Mother Teresas. That was good. Andrew, you may need a beep now, or a bleep now. Go ahead, Andrew. I see you in the monitor. You're doing backflips. My God. You look like you just...
And Senator, by the way,
just ate some...
I don't disagree with a lot of the things that are on that chart, but I would just, from a contextual perspective, just so we're all on the same page, I think there's a couple things that aren't on that chart. One of which, of course, is COVID demand that came back, what was happening in the broader economy. I mean, I think that was a huge part of why you saw that move in the price. And the secondary question that I would ask you about is, do you think that Larry Fink is actually that powerful? Because the truth is, while I think Larry Fink gets a lot of credit, and maybe I've given it to him and others have, maybe we've given him too much credit, in many ways you could say he was a follower and in some ways not a leader, in that a lot of what he would talk about was that pension funds around the world, and you could argue Europe pension funds and others, and I know that those aren't U.S. funds, but were pushing in this direction, and that he effectively was just sort of going with the flow, but also saying that given these cross currents, that's where the market is. And as a free marketeer yourself, I'm curious how you think about that. Here's a guy, whether you like him or not, there's a free market element of this is the way the company decided to go. Maybe it was the right call, maybe it wasn't, but it was. I mean, it's what he did.
All right, so let me take both of those, and let's start with your second point. Listen, what Larry Fink is doing has been unprecedented in the rise of ESG, and I think there's a real problem with people who are investing, who are voting shares of passively invested funds. Larry Fink is not using his own money to vote as a shareholder. If he were Warren Buffett, listen, I don't agree with Warren Buffett's politics, but if he invests in a company, he has a right to vote those shares. What Larry Fink is doing is taking your shares and my shares and millions of little old ladies who've invested in funds, and he's aggregating that vast amount of capital, and he's decided to vote not to maximize their returns because apparently his fiduciary duty to his customers is not a top priority. He's voting instead on his politics. His politics, he's decided that he's more welcomed at the New York Country Club when he walks in and has stood against oil and gas, even if it reduces the returns of the accounts he's managing, and even if it's destroying jobs, helping America's enemies and hurting America. And I think we ought to look very seriously at the ability of managers of other people's assets to vote those shares to advance their own political interest, because that is not capitalism. That is abusing the market. Now, let me start with your first point. Your first point, you said, well, gosh, the price increase, it's really driven by increased demand. Yes, after COVID, demand went up. Now, what happens normally when demand increases, which is the market replies with enhanced supply? That has not happened sufficiently here. And if you look at it, a couple of years ago, 2019, the high point in modern times for oil production in the United States under President Trump was 13 million barrels a day of U.S. production. America was the leading producer of oil in the world, the leading producer of natural gas. It is right now 11.5 million barrels a day. We are 1.5 million barrels down. And so while demand skyrocketed, supply stayed suppressed, and that is precisely why prices gone up. My point is, it is Joe Biden's deliberate policy decision to put policies in place to drive that supply down, especially cutting off capital to new exploration, cutting off equity, cutting off debt. That is having the intended effect of this administration.
Senator, what do you make of this argument? And I have to admit, I'm sitting here in Davos, Switzerland. There's a big debate happening about this BlackRock issue. But there are a bunch of people who are saying something actually different, which is this. If you take the BlackRocks or American firms out of it and that they're not allowed to vote their shares, who then actually has the power? Not the individual, because most individuals in the U.S. are not voting. Who has the power? The foreign pension funds, the large, the Tomasics of the world, Norway's pension fund, the folks in the Middle East. They're the ones who actually then would control the market. Is that a good thing?
Well, look, that may not be a good thing either, but I can tell you, having people controlling billions, hundreds of billions, even trillions of dollars, that is not their capital. They used to vote it. Listen, 10 years ago, they would vote it in a way that they were trying to maximize shareholder value and investor value. That made sense. What's changed is the rise of woke capital. What's changed is too much of Wall Street and too many of the Fortune 500 CEOs are more focused on politics. And I got to say, after what happened to Disney in Florida, that may be changing. There may be a few CEOs looking around going, maybe we ought to focus on selling a better mousetrap and not on being the most avant-garde left-wing political activist. But it is dangerous. And I'll tell you, in Texas, I talk with Texans all the time and urge them, listen, if New York is not going to fund new exploration, the state of Texas needs to stand up, create new banks, new sources of capital, because what we're seeing, I was out in Midland in the Permian Basin a few weeks ago. There's an enormous desire to drill more, but one of the huge problems is a shortage of capital because the Biden administration has waged a war between the SEC trying to shut off equity capital and Biden's banking appointees trying to shut off debt. The very simple reality is you can't drill a new well unless you can get the capital to do so, and that has become much, much more scarce in this environment.
All right, Senator, we've got to end it there. Don't have time for